a little bit earlier today than we normally do, but
Welcome.
the show must go on, right?
Show
So,
always goes on.
yeah, for real. So today we got Mr. Emilio Hernandez of Nightfall Exotics. Emilio, why don't you go ahead and get us started off with your herp origin story? How'd you get into this hobby? What made you fall in love with it?
How's it going, everybody? So, my name is Emilio. I own Nightfall Exotics. I've been loving reptiles since I can remember. The furthest back I can think of is I remember I used to go to the Franklin Park and Stone Zoos a lot when I was a kid with my family, and my favorite exhibits were always the turtles and the geckos. That was always it. Wherever I went it was always turtles and geckos. And then as I got older, I started owning leopard geckos, fat-tailed geckos, and then that just really, as I got older, I really started to focus on the eublepharid geckos, even as I kept other species. And especially when I was in college, I really, really fell in love with cave geckos. And so as I got to meet a lot of other people that kept reptiles or were in the hobby or knew someone that was in the hobby, I was able to sort of carve out a path working with cave geckos and meeting more niche gecko experts. And that's been a really rewarding experience the past, I'd say. Within the hobby part of it, I'd say it's been the past 6 years, and then since I was like 8 otherwise.
Nice.
Awesome.
So, like I said, we're here to talk some cave geckos today. More. So we're talking Goniasaurus orientalis, and you're gonna have to say this other one because I cannot pronounce it. It's Goniasaurus what?
Kurawai.
Kurawai.
Cool.
the
There you go.
the Kurawa cave gecko. So I
All right.
actually I'm gonna say this now. I on my reel about the species, I accidentally misspelled the scientific name, and someone very kindly corrected me in that comment section, and it made me very upset that I can't edit a reel because I did not intend to spread that.
Yeah,
Um,
that's
this
okay.
is this is my formal retraction of that spelling.
Duly
Nice.
noted.
Right. So, right. So let's kind of talk about the natural habitats for both of them. Is there any differences between their natural habitats, or are we
so
looking kind of the same stuff?
So these guys are found in different parts of Japan. I had written. Oh, whoops! I'm sorry about that. I had actually written a little bit about that I'm happy to talk about. But so Kurawai is the Kurawa cave gecko, and those guys are found in here. Sorry, I want to make sure that I had written this out because I did not want to accidentally mispronounce any of the names of the islands. Um, so Gunnerosaurus kurwai is found in Okinawa, Korishima, and Sesoko. And so those guys live in subtropical forests, and the elevations on those islands are actually below sea level by over 1,000 feet.
Mm,
And
Oh,
so those guys are living in a mix of rocky terrain, but also very thick wooded forests. Steve Sykes actually recently was on a trip in I want to say Okinawa, and he posted a bunch of photos on his Facebook of wild kurawai that he actually saw when he was over there. And so from what I saw in the photos, the region that they live in for the most part, from what's been recorded, they're very often out at night, of course, as most eublephaриds are, but they really like to come towards the entrances of caves, as a lot of the cave geckos are, where they can eat a lot of slow-moving isopods, millipedes, and similar slower-moving invertebrates. And then, did you also want me to talk about the Orientalis natural habitat?
oh yeah, definitely.
please.
So, Orientalis is a bit of a toss-up right now because they are considering revising the name to Sengokui, and there's actually quite a few species of Japanese cave geckos and species from Japan that not only fit the Orientalis profile very well, but there are some beliefs that there could be some muddling with subspecies as well. But Orientalis are found in for the Ryukyu Islands, that is in Tonaki Island, Takashiki Island, Ie Island, and Aka Island. And they're generally found around a little bit more rockier terrain than the Kurawai, was what I have read and what I've heard from people who have been in the area. And they are found primarily around evergreen foliage. And in my personal experience between working with the two species, I have noticed Kurawai get primarily larger, and tend, for the most part, in my experience, to fare with the cold a little bit better than Orientalis, but that's just a little bit of a toss-up.
Okay.
Interesting. Where are you gathering most of this information, if you don't mind me asking? Is there any specific literature you've read to get this information, or is it just word of mouth talking to people, or?
So a little bit of it is word of mouth talking to me. There's a really good collection of information on on not the entire genus, but a large component of the genus. I'm happy to either post it on my Instagram later, or I can send it to you guys as well if you want to send it out to people.
Oh, for sure.
But it
Yeah.
is in English and Dutch, and it covers a lot of general information on about 10 different species of Goniosaurus.
Awesome.
In both German and in English. So it has a lot of information that is primarily from the early 2000s. The website itself is kind of stuck in there, but the information is still useful.
Awesome. Absolutely. It'd be great. Jake, probably put it in the show notes somehow, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. Just
Absolutely.
send me the link. I think I've actually seen that too.
You probably
I've
have, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Huh.
I think
I haven't.
I watched or I was reading up on it when I knew I was going to get some cave geckos. So I was like, all right, let me do some research, and I think I actually wound up finding that website. I just can't remember off the top of my head what it's actually called.
It has a bit of a confusing name because it was I think it's like a stuck in that like early 2000s domain kind of name where it's super
Yeah,
long. But
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I just sent it to you, so that's been really
Okay.
valuable. And then this is something that I honestly recommend for everybody. If you have read scientific articles, they can be a little bit, they're not as cut and dry as just reading a care article off Reptiles magazine, but I'd really recommend for people working with more obscure species, if you're trying to find literature on them, to read scientific articles. Obviously, paywalls can be an issue, but there are always ways around paywalls. I
Oh
was
yeah.
a college student, I can promise that. Um, and honestly, those articles can be really helpful. ResearchGate has a lot of really interesting things. That was how I did a lot of research on the Japanese species, because there's recordings about where they're found, the species of plants around there, and you as a gecko keeper can sort of go off of that information to see what you can tweak, what you can try to replicate. Especially when it comes to things like temperatures and foliage for breeding purposes.
Okay.
Awesome.
So let's kind of get into that. So for each of them, right? Are there any differences in between setting both of these up, like for for them to have a thriving environment?
So the key thing for cave geckos in general, but especially for the Japanese species, in my experience, and from talking to a lot of other people that have success with the various Japanese species, you really, really need to make sure that those temperatures are not getting too hot.
Mhm.
They can handle temps. The coldest that I would say they can comfortably handle is like 69 degrees. You really should be trying to go for like lowest 70. But I find
Mhm.
that when you keep the Japanese caves, this is all the species, and then I'll get into specifics, but all the species do best between about 73 and 76 degrees. And then specifically for Orientalis, and I try to keep them specifically around 75 exactly. That's what I find works really well for them. And then for the Yamashine, Splendens, and for the Kurawai, I let them go a little bit cooler at around like 74.
Okay.
Interesting.
Huh.
So Japan gets
Okay.
quite a bit of snow. I'd imagine they have to be pretty either really smart in avoiding the cold weather, or
My
I don't know.
understanding is that they're very cold tolerant. I
They
haven't been
have to
able to
be.
find specific literature on how they overwinter, but I do
Yeah.
imagine that similar to a lot of species, when it gets colder, they retreat into caves and the like.
Um,
Um, a very significant thing to consider with the species is they do require a cooldown period to properly cycle them every year for breeding. Right now, I have so this is just one of the rooms that the animals are in, and I have the all of the breeding adult cave geckos in this room right now because it's about. I'm trying to think of how much I've cooled this room down to. The side that they're on right now was last I checked about 72 degrees. Um, I might let it. I'm the lowest I'm gonna let it do is dip down into 71 for their cooldown.
Oh
Um,
wow.
for my Heinenensis and for my Belongs, I tried 69 degrees last year. It seemed a little bit too cold in hindsight, so that's why I stuck a little bit higher this year. But by cycling them this past year, I had a huge success rate with my Orientalis, and next year I'm hoping for the same for the Kurawai and the other Japanese species as well.
Awesome. How many species
Yeah.
of caves do you work with altogether?
I'm gonna list them because my brain is really bad at doing numbers. So right now I'm working with Hainanensis and Bewanglinensis, and then Orientalis, Kurawai, Splendens, Yamashine, Luai, and Aranius as well.
Okay.
And so they're
how many
definitely plans to
genus?
expand.
Yeah, how many total are there like in the hobby?
In the hobby,
And
I
still,
want to
yeah.
say that there's maybe 5 other species that are established. The
Okay.
problem is that quite a few have been quite a few have been recorded recently. So there's, I think, like in the past 30 years, I think there's been like 8 more species added.
Oh wow.
And then there's also a lot of revision. But right now, from my understanding, other than the ones that I'm working with, there's also Lichtenfelderi, which is visually very, very similar to Hainanensis. And then
Okay.
there's Catbyensis, Juliensis, and quite a few other species that I'm like just totally blanking on. Right? Oh, and Toyamai is one that it's another one of the
Oh yeah,
Japanese
yeah.
species that's really,
Mhm.
really, really hard to find, but absolutely gorgeous. People
Yep.
in Germany and Amsterdam primarily seem to have a lot of those species over there.
I
Yeah.
was reading there was
I
somewhere
think
in
I
the
remember.
20s altogether, like 22 or 24 altogether, right?
Yeah, there's quite a large amount, honestly.
Yeah, I
The
was blown
Eubleph
away when I saw the number. I was like, damn.
Yeah, eublepharid geckos can be very diverse, and these guys are fascinating in the sense that the Japanese, Chinese, and Vietnamese species seem to all have a bit of a range of body plans that varies quite significantly. But especially for the Vietnamese species like Luai and Aranius, they get very stretched out in
Mhm.
comparison to the more leopard gecko-y shape that the Orientalis and the other Japanese and Chinese caves also hold.
Interesting.
Yeah.
What are those?
So, because you said the
Binos
Kirai,
geckos, those guys are fun.
they
Yeah.
get much bigger, right? So, what kind of feeders do they like most? Yeah, what kind of feeders do they like? And then what kind do like the uh Orientalis or whatever? What do you like to feed them better or more?
Well, for my Florida folks, discoids, and then for everyone else, dubia.
All
Um,
right.
those are always really good. I like those to balance with crickets, just because crickets are less of an issue nowadays. But I always get a little worried about just getting a bad batch of crickets, so that's
Yeah.
why I always try to like balance it out. But I find crickets, dubia and biscoids, as well as caterpillars, just hornworms,
Oh, okay.
silkworms, waxworms.
Okay.
Those all make up really, really, really good feeders, especially for fattening up laying females. And then this is a big one. And so I mentioned in the wild, they like to eat isopods. I really recommend seeing how they do with just regular isopods. You don't want to be feeding them rubber duckies unless you can afford it. But I definitely recommend seeing if yours will eat, just the normal Porcello species, for example. Uh,
Hmm.
it's very good to get some extra calcium in them naturally, but also it's just good to have them in there. If you're going on a long vacation, and you're feeding them, you can have a little bit of extra assurance knowing that if there's some pill bugs in there, they're going to provide a snack for your geckos while you're gone. Um,
Nice.
Absolutely.
and
So,
then
do they forage? Have you
they
ever
will,
seen them like
yeah,
forage? Okay.
they
Nice.
definitely will forage. That's why I recommend, for roaches, just always, try to, if you can, make sure that they're eating everything. For crickets, they'll
Yeah.
just chase after them the entire time. Same with, faster moving like baby silkworms and the like that are just, moving around, and you drop them in the enclosure, they'll go right after them.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh yeah.
What are you doing as far as supplementation and like vitamins? Are you and like what's your frequency? What's your supplementation regimen? If you explain that for us.
So I do, weekly dustings. I do a combination of the Zoomed Reptivite, and I also use I use the Rapashi Calcium Plus as well. Um, and so I try to use both with and without D3. I specifically for these guys, while they do not need UVB, or I specifically, I'm very serious about this. You need to stay on your supplementation. These animals can calcium crash, And they're smaller geckos. They're not as hardy as leopard geckos. Leopard geckos, on the with the right tools, leopard geckos will continue laying and stay fat the entire time. These guys, you need to really, really hammer in. You're getting those feedings in. You're getting your dustings. If your animals seem like they're fighting, you want to get the male out of there as soon as possible because they can overbreed the females. Um, a lot of people do fine leaving, pairs together year round. For my Chinese species, I have success doing that. For the Japanese ones, just because the females can start doing really badly out of nowhere, it's really important to keep an eye out.
Okay.
No.
So now I'm looking at the tail, right? So does that tail get much bigger than that, or like me fatter, or is that just how they naturally are for their life?
So I've noticed some fluctuation between species on like fat retention in the tail. They definitely
Okay.
do. The tail is definitely still a sign of health the way that it is for other eubliferids, but I'd compare these
Yeah.
guys to coleonyx where like if the tail is
Okay.
super thin, that'll be an issue, but the tail's
Yeah.
not going to get as fat as say, leopard geckos or
Gotcha.
any
Okay.
African fat tails. The I will say that the Chinese species, Bewangling and Hainan, they definitely seem to hold a lot more fat in their tails than the Japanese
Yeah.
species do. That being said, the Kurawai that I have do have really fat tails. So
Okay.
I think it does play a part, but not as significantly.
Yeah. And so it's kind of species dependent on how big those tails will get.
For the most part, yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Talking
So
about the tails and them being, a sign of health or not health. What else would someone look for with these Japanese species for signs of good health? Like, what should someone pay attention to if they're at a show, they want to grab some? What are some things or some advice you could give someone to buying a healthy cave gecko?
So a very big thing to keep an eye out for is hydration. You want to make sure that in the back of the head or at the base of the tail, you're not seeing hips poke through, you're not seeing ribs. Sometimes at shows animals will get a little dehydrated. It's going to happen. You've been transporting them. A lot of things can happen whether you're in a hot state or a cold state. But I think the biggest thing is check the back of the head. You want to make sure that it's nice and filled out. Check the arms as well. You want to see if there's a lot of indents there. You want to mainly keep an eye out for if the animal looks like it has not been eating, it looks like it has not been given any fluids, and then also base of the tail. If the tail is not full, that is generally a bad sign because these animals already don't really hold that much fat to begin with in their tail. So if you're seeing, the bone through that, that's a really bad sign. And then I think the biggest thing to keep an eye out for is overall. I think the stomach too is a big thing. If the stomach is super super descended, it means that the animal could have parasites. And more importantly, is not eating. And these guys can be, if they aren't eating already when you get them, really finicky to get on food. The good news is that for the Japanese species, so few people are working with them, and majority of them are not certainly not legally getting imported, that generally speaking, if you see a Japanese species at a show, it's going to be in good health. But again, you want to really make sure that you're not seeing any indents, you're not seeing any lack of hydration. That's what takes
so
these
why are
guys out the
people
quickest.
not working with them then? Like not a lot of people working with them because I mean they're gorgeous. They are some gorgeous geckos. Like I don't understand why people. I remember back in the day they were like pretty like actually pretty cheap, and now they're a lot more expensive. And actually, I think I pointed my buddy James to you to try to grab some.
Absolutely,
But
yeah.
yeah,
Very excited to
what is
get
your
them into his
opinion on
hands.
that? Oh yeah, definitely. What's your opinion on that? On why more people are not working with these?
I think also, from a large part of it, from my understanding, is that people, just like happens with a lot of other species in the hobby and with the industry, people got a little bit tired of them. People started phasing out of them because they used to go, like the Orientalis used to go, from what everybody tells me, for like 150 at shows for years.
Yeah,
And then
150,
all of a
$200.
sudden, what I believe has influenced the price of them was both the CITES listing. There's no more imports coming in, so everything we're seeing now is captive bred. This is what's here. And then also, this is what I think. A large part of it is also just obscure geckos. Once they get a bit more of an appearance on social media, social media is such a huge motivator for people having interest in species nowadays. I think now people are starting to like see them and get more of an interest. But for a little bit, they were like just another obscure gecko that over time people stopped having interest in because they weren't moving the same way. But definitely now I am seeing a resurgence in interest, and also hearing from people that used to work with them that they're interested in getting back into them. So I
Yeah.
definitely think it was more of like the market changed, people left them for a bit, and now they're returning.
I think social media
Yeah.
plays a huge part, like you said too. There's so many animals out there, with these all the animals that are popular, crested geckos and a lot of the New Caledonian stuff. I mean, it's like insane how many of them there are out there. But I think it's a huge part, like you said, it's the attention that they get. When some of these other species get attention, it's they just have the tendency to take off. I mean, if you look at some of these things, and maybe not all Japanese species, but there's a lot of geckos out there, for argument's sake, that are much easier to keep and require a lot less attention than a lot of these gateway geckos do, and they just don't get the attention, on social media, and therefore they never get the love that they deserve. Man, I mean, these things are gorgeous. I mean, how do you? How can someone claim to love geckos as a whole and not have these things on their radar? I mean, it's social
They
media.
they
Social
are
media.
an absolutely incredible species, and I do hope that more people are brought into it by social media, because definitely right now we're seeing that interest in New Caledonian species, and of course leopard geckos are like the gateway to cave geckos in a way, because a lot of people at shows have come up to me and gone like, oh, is that a leopard gecko? And I have a hainan on the table, and I'll talk to them a little bit about the care. And for people that have already kept a corn snake, or they've had ball pythons, or they've had, or even people that have had a little more, something a little more demanding in comparison, such as blue tongues and the like, they'll be interested in having something new, something sort of in between. So the Hainans kind of offer that gateway into, it's like a leopard gecko but emo, is what everyone likes to say to me.
I
um
I call him a gothic gecko.
yeah, like a goth, exactly,
Mhm.
goth leopard gecko.
Yeah.
um but that, so what seems to really bring people in is sort of their almost antithesis to what leopard geckos are, where you have like these brightly colored yellow to orange geckos, for leopard geckos that are generally larger and smiley, versus their like evil cousins who are
Hmm.
smaller body, definitely easier to set up in terms of spacing, and then just come in a very different but very unique array of colors, as well as those bright red eyes that are super
Yeah.
striking.
Yeah, I love those eyes, man. Like that really got me with with the Goniasaurus species. Like, just having different eyes compared to the rest of the, like the Eubiflaris species, that got me right there. That's why, like I said, I grabbed those couple pairs. I'm gonna grab some for you later on. Yeah, I'm starting my cave gecko game strong.
Do
Oh,
they all have red
absolutely.
eyes? Do all species of Gonisaurus have red eyes?
So it does vary. There are a couple species that don't, including Bolongensis has a bit more of like a browner color for their eyes, and then the Yamashine have almost yellow eyes.
Oh,
So
that's
it
already
definitely does vary, but the ones that have like the really bright red eyes of all of them are definitely the Orientalis, Splendens, and then also of course Hainanensis.
yeah. So for like I said, so you cool down your geckos, and then so when does breeding season start for you, and then so kind of take us through that process of once that happens, what kind of incubation you're using, what kind of incubation medium, and uh, how long does it usually take for all these geckos to hatch?
So in breeding them, specifically for Orientalis and for Kurawai, I do the cool down period from December to February.
Mhm.
And then in February, I put the animals back in ambient 74 to 76, um, and depending on species, and then like I said, I do 75 for the Orientalis. Um, and so I'll put males and females together. And for those guys, what I'll do is inspect. They generally pair off relatively quickly. Like by the end of February, I usually see them pairing together. And so
Okay.
I just keep an eye on them. I do keep them together for the duration of the summer. I do 1 to 1. Some people have luck with 1 to 2. I've had issues with females ganging up on males, even with quite a bit of
Oh
space.
wow.
So my recommendation is just do 1 to 1. It's a lot easier to monitor animals' health that way too, especially when you're monitoring poops, which I always recommend for your animal's health.
Yeah.
Um, And so when you do the 1-to-1, you're gonna witness them pairing off, and then females tend to lay. It can be a little divided, but I'd say the time in between clutches tends to be about 45-ish days.
Okay.
And so they'll lay a clutch of two. Uh, Eggs are just like the Heinenensis bewongs. They're much smaller in comparison to the Heinenensis. The eggs are softer, leathery shelled. I have tried so many different incubation mediums for these guys. Um, Everything kind of works until it doesn't, is sort of how it goes with incubating stuff. And so what I've stuck to now is hatch right.
Okay.
That's been working really well for me. But for the longest time, I was actually using the sim container with with water crystals, and then
Okay.
and so that worked really well, especially when I was in Florida. But since I've been in Massachusetts for school, I have found that using hatch rate has just garnered much more of a higher success rate. I had every single Hainan hatch this year, which
Oh,
was
nice.
really cool. And then I had, like, I still have, God willing, I still have Orientalis still cooking right now. Some of them are at day
Uh,
92 and looking ready to
oh,
pop.
wow.
So
Oh,
Okay.
those guys have gone for a while. So the duration between lay and hatch for these guys can vary, but I incubate at about 73 degrees, and the hatch rate has kind of been between 89 and 94 days for all of these guys.
Okay.
Yeah.
And are you suspending them, or are you like putting little indents and putting them into the hatch, right?
So for the sim container, I suspended them, but for the hatch
Yeah,
rate,
yeah.
I've just been putting them right into the hatch rate, and
Okay.
honestly, that seems to have worked better for me this year.
Okay. Yeah.
But you really can do either. It's just about making sure that the humidity is good in there and that you're
Yeah,
not
yeah.
soaking your eggs. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I'm guessing it's just like you said. It's probably because you're up north now, where it's a lot colder and that humidity is not there, so that Sims container method might not be as good as like when you're down in Florida, where it's crazy humid. So that makes sense. I mean, and that's definitely good for people to hear that, because, like you said, we all have to take care of these geckos a different way just because of where we live. So that's definitely some great advice right there.
are they burying their eggs? How do they lay their eggs? So they bury them, or they just lay them on the surface?
Yep, they'll bury them. I like to provide a good amount of leaf litter in that area. I always try to have one corner with just a little bit of extra substrate, just so that it builds a slightly larger level. And then, yeah, just cover
Right.
that with some leaf litter, and then they'll designate that spot as their little lay area. I will, if you move the enclosure around, they'll just redesignate their spot. But yeah, so they'll bury pretty much right to the bottom, and then lay two eggs at a time. And so I will say, because you want to be missing these guys consistently, your soil will eventually get decently what you do want to make sure that you're really monitoring the eggs, so that when they do get laid finally, you don't let them get soaked. But they'll do pretty well in some humidity for like a day before you have to grab them out. So the eggs are fairly
Okay.
hardy too.
Yeah. Yeah,
Awesome.
because I think I was listening to a podcast, or a buddy Matt. So he has a podcast called Not Another Reptile Podcast, and he had Phil Trimper on, and they were talking about Goniasaurus a little bit, and he was talking about just like letting them just hatch inside the enclosure. Have you ever had any of that happen? Like where you like forgot, like you didn't find a pair of eggs and they hatch inside there?
I had that happen for the first time. I've had that happen with cresteds before, and then
Yeah.
that happened for the first time this year with caves, because I bought quite a few pairs of belongs this year,
Okay.
and so I had a whole bunch of them set up, and one of the new pairs I hadn't thought had been going yet. So I had not been really thoroughly checking for eggs until
Hmm.
I found a fully formed baby just running around the enclosure, and I was like, ah, you're not supposed to be in there. What are you doing in here? And so I found that one, and I found its clutch mate had not yet hatched, but hatched like within 2 hours after I pulled that egg out. Um, and like when I candled that egg, when I candled that egg, it was like so ready to hatch that I could see it wriggling in there. So I just put it right in the substrate, and it was already out. But that was a cool experience, honestly. I
Yeah.
personally have not let them hatch in the enclosure, but I mean, obviously you're doing things right if you're maintaining your enclosures properly enough that the eggs are hatching in there, no problem.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Absolutely.
So,
So one,
for go ahead, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
I was gonna say, so, for the babies, right? So, how are you setting up your babies after they're hatching out? What does that look like?
Here, so I'll really quickly just grab one of the baby bins as an example. I put one over here. I brought it out of the other room.
Perfect.
So these are the PSU enclosures, the little tarantula enclosures. You can get these off
Okay.
of Amazon for like $10 each or so. They also have them a lot at the shows down south, and I've seen them over here as well. So my recommendation is, I can't unfortunately point the camera down, but in this
That's
I
fine.
do like I do your simple terrestrial small gecko setup, kind of what a lot of people do for baby cresteds. What I do is a layer of substrate. Personally, for substrate, I really have enjoyed using a combination of the Zoomed Reptisoil and the Zilla Forest, the jungle mix. I combine those two, and I find that that works really well as a really solid, like, in between substrate for these guys. So I just
Right.
do a little layer of that, a water dish. I do some foliage. You can do a live plant, or you can do plastic plant, and then lots of hiding spots. Do at least 2 hiding spots for your babies. Do 3. They'll utilize every inch of those hiding spots.
Yeah.
Um, and then let me see if I can get this little one. And then of course here's one of
Nice.
the baby Orientalis. So
Okay.
this is one of the ones actually in the photo of my most recently posted pic on Instagram. So this one has been growing out for the past couple months. But these guys
Uh,
do super well in like a basic little setup like that. Yeah, one of those guys. That's the one
Okay.
on the left.
Beautiful.
Okay.
Beautiful animals.
Yeah.
They're absolutely
Definitely.
stunning, and it's making me really happy how well these guys have been growing out. I will say for the BB Orientalis, I've talked to Richie about this because I want to give a shout out to Richie Lale because he's the one that really, well, not only did he start this project because he sold me my first female Orientalis, but also he walked me through the breeding process. He told me all about what the do's and don'ts for cooling down. And more than anything, baby health is really important for the species because when they hatch out, they're really small in comparison to Hynenensis and Bewongs and Luai and Aranius. They come out super tiny, in comparison, a lot more fragile. They can be a pain to get to start eating. I find
Mm.
that what works best is instead of using whole tiny crickets, get a medium cricket. It can be gross. Pull off its head or cut off its head, whatever you want to do, crush its head, and then squeeze it. And then if you introduce, just like cricket guts to its face, that will generally induce eating a lot earlier on than
Mm.
just trying to let them chase after it. Some people like to go the other way, but I have found that I've reduced losing animals this way. It just gets them started a lot quicker. And also, like, especially if you're dusting from an early age, you're really getting an animal that's growing really fast and eating consistently from a very, very from a very young starting point.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. It sounds like kind of like the like that new cow world where like I have to do
Exactly.
that for like for guards. I've done it sometimes for a couple of my baby chihuahuas when they didn't want to eat, they just want the diet. So I'll just brain that cricket, squeeze out the juice, start rubbing it on their lips, trying to get them enticed. Like this is what you're supposed to be eating. Let's go, let's go, let's go. But yeah, that's. I mean, I'm glad that's almost like streamlined for most reptiles right there.
Oh,
So kind of
absolutely. Yeah.
makes it a
The
little bit
the
easier.
stresses of getting baby chewies to eat.
Yeah,
That's always a
our
fun one.
buddy Matt said, "Fuck those crickets."
Oh
So
yeah.
yeah, crickets, man. Like if I didn't have to deal with crickets, I wouldn't. But
No,
those are
exactly. A
they're the most
necessary
friendly. But
evil.
yeah, they stink so bad. God, man, I hate them. But it
I
is what
will
it
say if
is.
there's like I have no specific recommendation of one species over the other, but banded crickets are great in the sense that like they have the longevity on their side, and I will
Yeah.
say that they tend to move around a lot more than the other species, which really gets the interest of these guys because they're so movement oriented when they're hunting.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah.
and also it's nice because they'll actually silence them because those crickets seem like they can live like 3 years sometimes.
Oh yeah, I don't know about that one because every week I got to clean out a bin with dead crickets on the bottom. So
There's this like I'm like cursed with with in my Aki enclosure. there's like this one cricket that seems, it's probably because I keep putting new crickets in there, but there's one that's just been chirping there for what feels like 3 weeks now, and I can't find it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I feel that pain too. I've lost plenty of battles with crickets, like just in my old place. If one gets out and that thing's in my room somewhere, I just go to my living room because I was like, I'm not gonna listen to this shit all night. So I was like, you won the battle, but the war is not over with because because I like in my old place I would have a bunch of house geckos just roaming around freely, and so they
Oh
would
yeah,
get those
exactly.
crickets. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
when I was in Florida, it was like especially for the outdoor stuff, like all the stuff that's still outdoors over there does fine. If a lizard runs in or whatever, it's like it's gonna run out. But
yeah.
and anything that was out there would eat any excess crickets or whatever. But here it's like, okay, I guess there's a cricket. It just lives in my apartment.
Right. Yeah. So for the babies, what about like smaller isopods and stuff like that? Would that work for them as well?
So you can definitely try offering smaller isopods as well. The only reason I emphasize crickets and waxworms is just because that's fatty, that's
Yeah.
fatty prey that you can kind of tube squeeze out to get them started. But yeah, you can definitely, as they
Yeah.
get bigger, especially, start introducing isopods. You can introduce tiny discoids. They'll start diversifying from a pretty young age. It's just about what
Okay.
they can actually eat.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm just listening, brother. I'm you
Ed.
guys teaching me everything. You got it, Jay.
Oh, okay. So besides that website, is there any good books out there for people to find to read up on them? Um,
So I unfortunately do not have any book recommendations yet. I am happy to look into it because I'm sure that if I like really sat down, I could give a bunch of good book recommendations.
yeah.
But I do strongly recommend checking out all of the different ResearchGate articles on the different species, as well as the website that I sent to you that will
Yeah.
hopefully be linked.
Yeah,
And
it
then
will.
other than that, it is always good to talk to people on Facebook groups as well. Um, Fauna used to have a good thread on them for a while as well, but that hasn't been for a long time. And then reach out to people, people like Richie, myself, Melissa, who you guys have had on before as well from We Grow Reptiles. All of us, are happy to talk to people and share our experiences. I'm sure I'm speaking for them, so I apologize, you guys, if I'm just speaking for you. But both of them have taught me a lot of what I know. And we're happy to share this kind of, I'm definitely happy to share this kind of information with people. It's about sharing the importance of especially for more niche gecko species, teaching people what to do right, teaching people how to maintain these endangered or vulnerable species in captivity. And
Yeah.
because people have such a huge interest in them and there is a growing interest just on a broader level, it's been super nice to talk to more people and sort of recommend the species, get to work with them. It doesn't need to be me who sells them their first Japanese cave gecko. I'm just glad that I'm able to provide information for that. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, to answer your question, long story short, I should have literature recommendations, and I will have for literature recommendations by the end of this week because I want to read up
Yeah.
to.
So our
There's a
buddy
good
Matt
book.
said the Eyelid Geckos book is awesome. Uh, I guess it's that your favorite book. Have you ever seen
Oh,
that
and
one?
I think I have the book that I remember really distinctly. It was Philippe's Leopard Gecko Manual, which I'm sure is still somewhere in my parents' house or when I was 11. And I don't remember distinctly the book having a section on Goniurosaurus, but I remember their section on Coleonyx was actually what prompted me to look more into the other species of Eublephaриds when I was a kid.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah. He said it's
yeah.
called the Eyelash Geckos by Kirschner and something else in German. So
It's
I
got
can't
I'll have
remember.
to
chapters in there and cave geckos.
Yeah.
I'll have to keep my eye out. That's definitely something I need to read up on because I absolutely love reading books. One of my favorite things about shows is all the tables of books from the
Oh
the
yeah.
90s. I
I love
love
going to the
love those books.
yeah, going to the book people at the reptile shows just to see what they got. Even if
Oh,
it's something I'm
absolutely.
not gonna be really interested in, but I can still read up on it. I said the last book I got was that the gecko fauna of the USSR. I was like, I'm probably
Oh,
never gonna get a
nice.
gecko from there, but it's a good book to read. So, no.
Yeah, I recently got Reptiles of Ecuador, and that is an absolutely
Nice.
fantastic one.
Yeah,
Um,
nice.
but yeah, no, there's lots of good books out there. So if anyone watching, if you ever go to a show, don't just look at the reptiles, look at the books too. There's a lot of interesting stuff over there.
Oh yeah, definitely. Go ahead, Ant.
So we talked a little bit about how you house your hatchlings and the babies. For our viewers out there, probably not going to be buying hatchlings. I mean, maybe young animals, but how would you suggest setting up, or how do you set up your adults? How do you set something up for life?
So for my adults, I vary a little bit. I have found that sterilite bins, as well as the largest size of those the tarantula enclosures, as well as the tarantula cribs brand for their terrestrial ones, all of those work really well. Just because they have lots of ventilation. For any sterilite bins, what I do is I will use a drill to make a larger hole for putting in screen. But then I'll use window screen for the I'll just use circular cuts of window screen for those ones, as well as doweling holes in the sides for some of the species. And then for the Araneus and for the Luai, just because they're on the larger side, I do have them in Exoterra. Let me quickly think. I have my Luai pair in an Exoterra 36 by 18 by 24. And then I have a pair of Araneus in a 36 by 18 by 12.
That's a big
Nice.
tank. They get around, huh? They got a lot of room in there.
They have a lot of room in there, but they're also the Luai get quite sizable. I
Oh,
sold a
really?
pair to my buddy Christian Larson from Intrinsically Ectothermic. So I hope at some point, if you ever
Yeah.
post them, people can see those are some very large cave geckos. Because whenever I had a female at Daytona um, that people were checking out, and she was quite large. I also got a female from a Melissa, and that female is probably the largest cave gecko in the collection right
Really?
now. She's in hiding, so I can't take her out, but she is absolutely stunning.
Which
I love that
species is the
gecko.
biggest?
I believe Luai is
Luai?
the
Okay.
largest.
Nice.
Yeah,
How
Now,
big do
how
they
big are
get?
we talking about as far as comparison to something else? Like, how big is a large cave gecko?
like 8.5 to 9 inches, which is in comparison to like here. I'll give you a quick example. So I'll pull out one of the Orientalis. Actually, so here's an example of how I have just one subadult female Orientalis set up. So again, I'm sorry that I can't put the camera over it because that would be a lot
Oh,
more
you're
helpful.
fine.
Um, but I do. So this is a mix of bioactive substrate. You don't have to do a bioactive substrate, but like I said, I find a lot of luck in mixing the jungle mix as well as rough to soil together. So I have that soil mix as well as leaf litter filled in here. Do a lot of leaf litter. They will hide under it. It's good for it helps them lay their eggs more comfortably. You won't regret doing that. Then I do water dish, multiple hides. Honestly, for hides, I really like to do cork flats or like partial cork rounds. They're perfect. You can stack them up, and I mean they don't look as gross as just having a bunch of plastic ones in there.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna
Absolutely.
quickly. Oh, perfect.
Are you
What kind of
using
plants do you
water
like to
bowls?
use?
Yes. I use water bowls. I use water bowls in all of them, and I keep them full constantly. So I did not pay attention to the label. This is a subadult male, so I'm just gonna put him right there really quickly.
Go ahead, keep talking. I gotta let this cat in.
No, you're all good.
How old are you able to sex them, and what are you looking for when sexing them?
So when sexing them, just like with other eublepharid, the males, it gets pretty obvious pretty quickly. You see a hemipenal bulge. Um, I can comfortably sex at about 6 to 8 months.
Okay.
Um, but I mean, I have been able, especially for Hynenensis and for Araneus, they tend to throw out hemipenes relatively early in comparison. So I'd say for them, it can be as like quick as like 4.5 months for some of them,
Really?
especially if you're like fattening them up real fast. So this
Really?
is a year and a half old Orientalis male.
Okay.
Oh, very nice.
And
What
now,
do you
is
think
that
is a
breeder
safe
ready?
age?
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Ant. Go ahead, Ant.
No, you got it, bro.
I was gonna say, is that breeder ready, or does that still need time to grow?
So he is just about large enough to breed, but just because it is the end of the season, that's why he's going into cooldown. He wasn't paired up. But the main thing when keeping these guys is you want like to pair off a male, you want to do at least a year and a half. And then for females, I recommend 2.5 years. You just really want the
Okay.
animals to be fully grown, nice and fattened before you're doing any breeding, because like I said, these animals do take a hit a lot harder than leopard geckos do when breeding, and you really don't want to be risking sapping those calcium reserves.
Okay.
Awesome.
Now, do you wait for them to drop duds, or you're like, all right, it's 2.5 years, you look good, you're pairing them up, or like I said, do you just wait for the females to drop duds?
In all honesty, generally don't even. I wait for females to drop duds, but with the Japanese species, I have also just put them together after 2.5 years,
Mm-hmm.
and I just pay attention, let them do their thing, and then it's a little bit of just like keeping your fingers crossed, I will admit, but it
Okay.
definitely worked out this year because all of the females that I put together with males started producing this year.
Hmm.
Okay. So do you
Oh,
are
okay, he's fine. That was less than less than two
do you
inches off the grid.
are so when they're full grown, what kind or how much do they weigh?
So like a fully grown female can weigh about like 13 to 14 grams. The
Oh
males are
wow.
more sit around like 8, I would say.
Oh, these are light ones.
Wow, that's kind of
Yeah, in
small.
comparison.
Yeah. Yeah,
That's for
especially compared like a lot of them
Orientalis. Yeah.
like to like new cows, because you're like crested geckos 40 grams, 50 grams, Jahuas 60 to like
Oh
80
yeah, exactly.
grams and stuff like
And
that.
then
Okay.
yeah, and even lychee is really topping it off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, hell, even in comparison to leopard geckos, they're like those, you got leopard geckos that are like, can hit those 50, 60 gram marks. And then you got the giants that are hitting over 100. So that's crazy.
Oh yeah, no, exactly. I think like I said, because you can't really rely on weight the same way as you can for other species. Again, 8 grams, 9 grams. That's what I would go for males. They're
Okay.
not a huge species, so obviously, like if it's like 7.5, that's okay. As you can
Okay.
see, this isn't a gigantic male gecko.
Yeah.
Um, one of the main things you want to do is just make sure that the animal itself is, like I said, nice and well hydrated. The eyes aren't
Yeah.
sunken in. As you can obviously see, he's quick to move around, so he's very active as well. Um, Surprised he's this active considering the cooldown, but he's
Yeah.
honestly just out for a stroll
Oh,
right now.
so let's talk about because we did get a question in the chat, and I do know you. Oh, I've seen a post on there. So you want to talk about your pink project and how
Yes,
did that come
so
about?
So the pink line of crested geckos is a very high pink line that, from my understanding, has been primarily worked with in Europe. I talked with Richie a little bit about it at Tinley. There is a little bit of bottlenecking on a couple lines, so people should
Hmm.
be careful when pursuing that project. Um, but that said, I have two males and one female from a pink line. One of them is from Alimony Hobbies, that is Ian Polka. That's where I
Oh
got
yeah, yeah, yeah,
one of my males. And
yeah.
then as for the other females, I got them as for the other pair, I got one of them at Tinley and one of them at Daytona.
Okay.
And I need to research a little bit more on the full lineage, but those guys came from a Swiss import back in
Okay.
2021.
Do you
And
have any
what's
pictures of those on your Instagram?
yeah, yeah, I saw them on here.
I yeah.
And
I have a couple pictures of those, and then I can. Would you like me to grab one of the pink males?
Yeah, if
yeah.
you don't mind, it'd be cool. At
Yeah,
least so our
absolutely. Yeah.
listeners or
So
people watching can see what we're talking about.
absolutely.
I
One
saw them
moment.
on here too. Where did you go?
So I don't think, I mean, got hundreds of them. I don't think I've ever seen a pink crested gecko. Well, fire down,
No,
I
cave gecko.
suppose.
Cave gecko.
Oh,
Cave gecko.
cave
Sorry.
gecko. I thought you were talking about
Yeah, yeah,
crested gecko.
yeah, yeah. No.
So you can't see it quite the same way because he's not fired the same way. But you can see it
Um,
on that one. They have a very, very light pink in comparison to the more vivid orange.
I see. Okay, relax.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Oh,
these
that's
So is
guys.
cool.
that
That's
that
different.
bottlenecking? Is that
Hypo.
from like line breeding?
Yeah, it's just so there's one line that my name is blanking on it, but pretty much just like it's been so consistently bred into itself that the animals The animals look really rough. There's a lot of tail bending and a lot of facial drooping, the same way that, like, sort of like how with cresteds, you want to make sure that that face isn't too short. These with this line, like the face was starting to almost droop downward for
Yeah.
some of them. But yeah,
What
no.
do you,
So this is one of the Swiss line males.
what do you
Okay.
think it is? Just a form of hypo, or do you guys have any idea on what's going on?
Yeah. What's the community say about that one?
That is actually something that I had intended to talk with more people about at Tinley, because I don't fully know. It seems to be a pigmentation thing. Some people also have discussed that it could be locality based. Um, but the one thing that I can say is that when putting together pink lines, you don't always get a high pink baby.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely am interested in seeing where things go. I'm not trying to, like, promote it as, something that I'm building up. It's just been a cool
Yeah.
project to work on. And I
Yeah.
definitely, as I get more information on it, will be sharing about it. I'm very specific, especially because, there's been a lot of discussion with various species about, like, oh, it could be a gene, it could not be a gene. I don't want to come in
Yeah.
stating that that there's a new gene in
Yeah.
case
Yeah.
it ends up not being it. But it is super interesting to see such a high pink otherwise orange animal.
Yeah.
Just especially when they show off that pink so vividly, because, like, it's not really a color you see on geckos quite the
Have you
same way.
noticed anything different with the eyes or scalation, or is it just those bands that you've noticed the difference in?
It's really just those bands for the most part. I will say it also seems to make the black on the tail bands a little more gray, which is super cool as well. But again, time will definitely tell if there are, like, longer term implications, as well as maybe certain other things that it could be doing.
Are there any known morphs within cave geckos? Is there anything that's like set in stone? Does anybody have any like true morphs or
So there is a book that was going around a little bit. I can Again, it's on one of the Cave Gecko Facebook pages, so it's on there. I forget which one, but there is a book that was published sometime in, I believe, the 90s or early 2000s, that contains images of albino and hypo, as well as fully either melanistic or just patternless Hynenensis, and then I believe Kurawai as well. But those are
wow?
from the
That's
90s. Yeah, and
cool.
the pictures are
Yeah.
super cool. Like, when I say an albino cave gecko, I
Was
mean,
that?
like, it looks almost like a Tremper albino leopard gecko, but it's got that
Now,
cave
was
gecko body
those
plan.
were those photos out in the wild, or did they were those in captivity?
It's if The photos look like they were taken in someone's captive
Oh,
setup.
okay. Oh,
Yeah.
okay, so
Interesting.
they're within our hobby and not out there in the wild, wishing
Yeah.
we can have them, and we
No,
can't have them.
exactly. I'm
Okay.
sure that there have also been recorded wild animals, but what it definitely seemed like was that,
Yeah.
yeah,
So,
it definitely seemed that
because
way.
the only morph I've ever heard of was that lynx one, in the Honeyonensis, right?
Yeah, and myself personally, like, I don't know enough about that to really have much of a statement on it. People
Yeah.
definitely were producing geckos with high banding patterns and connections before. I can't speak to whether or not it was a brand new gene. I definitely will say that a lot of people stated that they had worked with similar animals and did not consider it a new gene.
Hmm.
That is what it is. There was never
Yeah.
much more literature posted about it, so it would be interesting if it was a new gene.
Yeah.
Mm.
No, I think that's just all in the eye of the beholder, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. So, so with the breeding, right? So, do you see, like, because I know, like, leopard geckos do a lot of that tail wagging and vibrating. So, did they do the same stuff?
Yep. I see the tail wagging, especially. You just see that, like, almost like
Side.
almost like caudal luring. I do. Yeah, the males will do that around the females. The actual, act of locking, I've only seen twice ever with any of my
Hmm.
species, but you do hear there's they do chirp. Um,
Okay. So they
so that is
vocalize too.
generally an
Nice.
indication of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But the main indication is just noticing bite marks on the back of the head of the females, as well as on the nape of the neck.
Hmm.
And then, of course, when you finally start seeing the eggs start to form whenever you check their underbellies, as well as when they're finally just laying eggs.
Nice. All right, go ahead,
Do
Hank.
these guys drop their tails often, or do you find it pretty rare that they drop their tail?
They see that's a funny question because I'm scared to say I haven't had a Japanese cave drop a tail because for whatever reason this year I had Hainans, Belongs, and Iranius that just right out the egg decided to drop the tip of their tails,
Oh shit.
which is just not fun. I will say this. I so far, knock on wood, have not had any Orientalis drop their tails. I have 2 females that I received already with regen tails, but so far none of my offspring have dropped their tails. But a lot of people I know say that like right out the egg, theirs will drop their tail sometimes, just out of nowhere. So it
So
can happen, especially for babies. It is something that you should try to avoid, but it apparently is a little more common. I think it's just because they're so small, they're so reactionary. They're more likely to like any stimulus be a little more freaked out and drop their tail.
Yeah.
Do they look much
That's
different does a regen tail look much different from a tail? I mean, how noticeable is it?
I will actually show you because I really think that they have really cool regenerated tails. It's sort of like the leopard gecko tails where it's a lot smoother. They don't get the knobs or the bumps on them the same
Right.
way, but they do get a really cool black and white pattern.
Really?
And I'm gonna see. So my oldest female has just the tip of her tail as a regen, and I will show that off.
Oh yeah.
So it's almost like a mottled cow pattern. So you can see
Yeah.
where the segmentation ends and then the regen begins. And so also the regen tends to be a little bit fatter.
Yeah. Yeah.
Huh?
It generally do they look a little bit smoother than their original tail?
Exactly,
I've
yeah. It's like
noticed. Yeah, I've noticed that like with like leopard geckos and stuff when they grow their tails back, they're really smoother, fatter, uh, not as scaly or bumpy with texture.
yeah, exactly. It's just to the touch, it's very smooth. Also notably, depending on where the tail break is, sometimes it'll grow at a little bit of an angle too. Like you can't really see it from how she holds it, but it veers just slightly off to the left, just a tiny bit. But that's just solely because of how the tail was broken. It has nothing to do with a tail kink or something.
Okay.
Very interesting.
So
I mean,
Yeah,
you'd
you can
figure
see.
like,
Yeah.
I mean, in comparison, I mean, it's just an observation, but like crested geckos, they drop their tails and they don't regrow them. And it seems odd to me that a crested gecko would drop its tail because of how much it actually uses it. Like a crested gecko's tail is a huge part of its life and survival, I guess. Now, when you look at certain species of these eye-lidded geckos, their tails are almost shaped like their heads, more so African fat tails and whatnot. But I think that they would use them much more as a survival technique as a decoy, right? So therefore, they'd be more apt to lose them due to predation or whatever. But I find it kind of, on the contrary, I find that they don't lose them nearly as much as crested geckos do, and it would appear that these geckos almost grow their tail to be lost, if that makes any type of sense. Just an interesting observations that I find, or at least interesting to me. Well,
I find interest in that as well because it is especially for eublepharid geckos and for other species as well. I know that this goes for having kept day geckos. This can go for Phelsuma as well as the Legodactylus species. That animals can drop and regrow the same part multiple times too. And so for them, it's such a cool concept that I think a lot of us have just like forgotten how alien that concept is to just drop and regrow a part of your body.
yeah.
it's
I
insane.
mean, there are animals that can kind of do that. Like gerbils can slough off part of their tail. They can't regenerate it the way that these guys can. And so, what I think for the eublepharid geckos like these guys, what makes that ability so significant is that, like for crested geckos, like you said, it's like losing a limb for them almost.
It
And they
is.
have to completely rewrite, their life story because they go from being an animal with 5 limbs, having a prehensile tail, to having to navigate effectively like a frog.
Yeah.
Um, Whereas for these guys, like even if they drop their tail at the base, it's not going to be, they're terrestrial geckos. It's not going to be affecting anything other than their ability to get away from a predator next time. So it really is just an absolutely fascinating thing, especially because in both cases you have island-based geckos that have evolved with island-based traits dependent on that.
Oh
Very
yeah.
cool that someone else sees it the way I see it. I will often
Yeah.
wonder, do people think of these things that think people think are so minor, or like, to me they're huge things. Like, they're things that people should pay more attention to, or at least be curious about. It's
Oh,
cool.
Yeah.
absolutely. We're in this in the industry and the hobby. We're almost cursed with knowledge. We have so much
Mhm.
information at our fingertips that some of the more like obvious information like tail dropping doesn't we don't let it sink in how
Mhm.
interesting it is because we
No?
just look past it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But yeah, that and also for these guys, another interesting little thing about them is the actual like speed in which they regenerate. I have noticed is quite significant. I think a large part
Really?
of it, especially when they're younger, like I like one of the baby hyenensis that dropped its tail had like a nice regen tail by the time the next show rolled around.
Really?
Nice.
That's
Yeah,
super
so
fast, actually.
yeah,
Yeah.
so that was definitely cool too, and that's more so on the babies. Makes sense. Smaller animal can regenerate a
Yeah.
lot quicker, but that
Oh
was
yeah. Fast
yeah, it is
metabolism and
it
all
is
that stuff.
fascinating. Exactly.
Yeah. So, can you share any other like anecdotal experiences or stories or interactions with your Ganosaurus species, uh, like with their behavior, personality, or anything like that?
So something that I do like about these guys is so people do sort of misunderstand, I think, how interactive the species can be because I wouldn't recommend them the same way that I would a handling species like African fat tails, leopard geckos, crested geckos, but at the same time, that doesn't mean that you can't interact with them. I mean, mine, whenever I'm out doing, nighttime feedings, I see them out. They're interested in what's going on. They are still eublepharid geckos. Eublepharid geckos um, notably seem to show some level of, pattern recognition, I think to some extent they habituate themselves to us around them. And
Hmm.
because of that, leopard geckos, I mean, you have one for like 5 years. It just walks onto your hand whenever you put your hand in the enclosure. It'll chill with you. You can achieve something similar with your Japanese or Chinese cave. I just obviously would recommend that you aren't pursuing it the same way.
Yeah.
Um, but they are very
You're-
interesting species, and they are interested in what is going on around them to the point where like I really like to have a lot of enrichment in there. Give them a cool piece of wood that they can climb all over. They will use every inch of what you put in their enclosure. Like when that night you'll hear them falling off of stuff.
my cave gecko's enclosures are nothing but one big jungle gym. That's like literally what, there's no real surface area or like substrate for them to hang on. It's all terrain. It's all bark on bark on bark, water
Exactly.
dish, and it's
Exactly.
all everything for them to do something with. Climb in, climb on, climb under. Like, it's like just crowded like a. It's, but they use it, like I said, and you mean, like, I know they forage, like you had mentioned. I'll go in and look, and you can see where they've actually dug up
So
the substrate.
yeah.
The jungle mix that I use, and they have different spots. Like when I pull the bark out to check to see if there's still crickets in or whatever, I'm disassembling the bin, and you can tell that they have little beds in different spots. Like, you were definitely bedding down there, they were definitely bedding over here. Like, they get around. I don't see mine much, but I can easily tell their patterns, and what they do by looking at their cage.
Oh yeah.
Super cool. They're
It,
not
they're
dumb.
absolutely fascinating. And I will say this is an important thing. Learn from my mistakes. Fill your enclosure with stuff. Don't fill it with so much stuff that you can't get access to your eggs. Don't do that.
Yeah. Actually, I think that happened to our buddy Matt. He filled his stuff with like he had his is so decked out in plants right now because he has Gonisaurus orientalis as well. And he was like, "Man, I can't. I don't even know if I'll be able to find all these eggs because it's planted so well and everything is just thriving in there." He's like, "I don't know." I was like, "Well, do what Phil said. Let the eggs
No,
hatch in there, and then
exactly.
find the
I will
babies."
say, as long as your animals are well fed, this goes for a lot of species, but as long as your animals are well fed and you're consistently keeping them nice and fat, babies will just be in there until you grab them.
Yeah.
And I mean, in your cases for a filled enclosure, you're going to be fine finding eggs. My concern was just like loading it up with bark to the point where like I had to like pull out every single piece to dig
Right.
under there. But having a filled enclosure is exactly what these guys want. These guys are running under rocks. They're running under, fallen pieces of trees. They're living, at the entrances of caves. These guys are utilizing terrain. They're climbing through cracks to get access to insects. You really want to give them that. You want to do these animals the service by giving them lots of hiding spaces, and you will be
Yeah.
rewarded by seeing them more often and by having consistent breeding efforts.
Yeah, I don't have any pairs yet. I just have three individuals that, I mean, maybe I will one day breed, maybe I won't. So I do imagine that when I do, I'll obviously have to rearrange it in a sense where it's, manageable. I'll have to get the eggs or, come up with something better. But for right now, while they're young, I like them to be mentally challenged and stimulated. Do you know what I'm saying? So that's
Oh,
why I give them
absolutely.
the ability
Yeah.
to have problems to solve, if that makes any sense. I want them to develop, not in a paper towel, pine hide environment, if that makes any sense. I want them
No,
to
I
learn how to
exactly.
be in an environment that's very, as close to their natural one as possible. I want them to climb. I want them to avoid falling. I want them to have water they know they have to stay out of. I create these little environments that, again, like I said, gives them the ability to mentally develop, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely.
Okay.
No, I completely agree with you. And I also want to say, because you just reminded me, I don't really recommend paper towel for these guys, except for when you're getting brand new babies to start eating. That is the only, because you want to make sure that you want to see them, you want to find that first poop, and then you can put them on soil and start feeding them on there, and it's fine. I only keep them on paper towel until they start eating, solely so that I can monitor their poops. They're not going to eat, a wood chip and die instantly.
Mm.
Species has existed this long for a reason. There's plenty of wood chips out in the island
Yeah.
of Okinawa.
Did
They're
Yeah.
I
still doing
hear
okay.
that stuff and it like trips me out because I have 200 over 200 geckos and none of them are kept on paper towels. I've watched geckos take mouthfuls, dive and miss a cricket and take mouthfuls of
Yep.
bark. I've, not that I'm better or worse than anybody else. I've never lost an animal, let alone to impaction. Like I've never had an animal die, let alone due to a mouthful of wood chips. Like if they lived in a sterile environment in the world, it just doesn't make sense to me. I mean, with all the talk and nerves that go on, or at least the excuse, like, why do you keep on paper towels? Like, you're probably more likely to die of a mouthful of paper towel than you are a bark, which in theory is the same substance. I mean, paper is wood. Wood. I mean, it's just one of those things to me. It's like you're overthinking it. Like you're overthinking the whole thing. These things live on dirt. Like a mouthful of dirt is going to do nothing more than bruise the thing's ego. Like
Yeah, shit.
it's
Yeah, they'll probably get some minerals out of it. Shit.
I
done.
always I like to joke that if my 8-month-old niece can eat sand and soil and be totally fine, so can your
Right?
gecko.
Absolutely.
I like that
Absolutely.
one. All right. So we're
Absolutely.
so we're coming up close to the end because I gotta get out of here. I gotta do family stuff. So Ant, go ahead and hit them with the closing question.
Well, I asked everybody pretty much the same question. If you could give advice to a kid out there that, idolizes what you do, that wants to grow up one day and breed geckos, vend shows, and make a lifestyle out of reptiles, what advice would you give a 7-year-old kid?
One of the most important things that you can do, just as a person as well as just in this industry, is don't burn bridges. Maintain good connections. There is nothing more
That's
important
life.
that you can do than networking. Be it just making friends or making new connections for any job that you have. You don't want to be the person that people don't want to associate with. And a large part of that means, you have to learn how to deal with people that are going to give you an attitude. You have to learn how to deal with people that maybe don't want to be around you, and that that's tough. But by being able to be a person that people can depend on, as well as a person people can be like, yeah, I got geckos from that person, and when I talked to him, he was super nice. I really enjoyed talking to him, and I'm going to get another animal from him. Or even better, just this person was super interesting. I'm going to recommend him to everyone I know. Or even just straight up walking up to someone and just shaking their hand at a show and just being like, hi there, I'm really interested in what you're doing. Could you tell me a little bit about that? Get their card, talk to them on Instagram. Don't be creepy about it, but just reach out to people, be a nice person, and things are going to work out for you really well. That is my number one recommendation.
I agree 100%. Absolutely.
Yeah. So my last question, I always ask this. What have been your biggest failures since getting into this hobby, and what have you learned from those?
My biggest failures have definitely been, and I've been open about this with some of my friends, but I, this past year, I unfortunately lost two very close friends, and in that time, as anyone that has dealt with loss can know, depression really will eat at your ability to even do the things you love. And when it comes to animals, it's important to remember that mental health is a difficult thing to confront, especially in this day and age where there's a lot of misinformation. And I think that when we're focusing on that, sometimes we can forget that we have animals we need to take care of, we have things we need to attend to. And I did unfortunately have an animal. I had one of my male breeders pass away due to just in the midst of things not paying attention as much. And because of that, it was important for me to confront not only that failure, but also what was I going to do. And using outreach services as well as just reaching in with my personal self-help skills, I was able to confront that. But I think that in that moment I realized that it's important to utilize your resources in your community to help yourself when you're in those moments, but also not forget that if you're keeping these animals, you have a responsibility to that. It's not just about you anymore. It's about making sure that all of your animals are healthy and maintained.
Absolutely.
And it's and like I said, the reason I'm sharing that is because I made a mistake and I'm extremely regretful of it, but moving forward I'm not going to make that mistake again. And unfortunately I know a lot of us have had those issues where an animal has passed away. And to emphasize what happened, it was just I had an animal that I had received a orientalis in that was already in rough shape, had been kind of going off eating, and I had just gotten him eating consistently. And then just after my friend passed away, I missed a consistent feeding, and the animal tanked. And so again, this isn't meant to bring anyone down or to speak on it. It's that these things happen, you will rise above it, things will get better. The most important thing is to remember you have people there for you, and you are there for your animals. Your animals cannot, no matter where you're at, your animals cannot make things good for themselves if you are not providing that for them. It is on you to be there for your animals, and it is on you to provide the perfect husbandry for them. So yeah,
Absolutely.
I would say that no matter what you're working with through life, always remember that you owe these animals their lives, not vice versa. So you want to make sure that you're providing and taking care of yourself. Take care of yourself as well as your animals. So that's a long-winded way of answering that, but that's my recommendation.
It's a perfect answer, man.
Respect it, man. It's
Yeah,
huge. Huge
facts.
respect for that, man. People underestimate, mental health, man. You take it for granted, man. And it's a huge step just for admitting as a man that we go through it, dude. You know, it's very important.
Yeah,
Yep,
definitely.
and no, exactly. And just gonna say it now because it's important. If you need to talk to someone ever, talk to people. People love you, people care about you, and the world is always better with people in it, especially people that you love. That is a very
Absolutely,
important thing
man.
that I always want to say.
Oh
Huge
yeah,
respect, brother. Huge
yeah.
respect. Absolutely.
Man, I wish we had more time because, dude, this
I
was a
know,
great.
yeah, yeah,
This was a great episode, dude. For real, this was, man. So definitely, we would love to have you back on. Like,
absolutely. Thank
we
you
could
guys
talk
so
about
much.
whatever
Please.
else.
I didn't even get into my questions.
I'm
Yeah,
glad
we'll
that
definitely get you guys,
I'm
or
glad to
we're
know
gonna
that
get you
you're
back
in
on.
Connecticut too, because we'll probably see each other at a show at some point. And Jason,
Right
I
here, man.
definitely we got to talk about those amnicoli too. I got to send you
Oh
some
yeah,
photos
yeah,
of those
definitely,
guys.
dude. Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah.
But yeah, thank you guys so much for having me. This was super exciting. I love talking about cave geckos with everybody, and I really enjoy watching the gecko exchange. So thank you again for having me.
Appreciate you, man.
Oh yeah, for sure, man.
So,
No, thanks for
where can
coming on.
everybody find you? How could everyone get in touch with you? Where? Give us the spiel, man. Read our
Yeah, for
audience
So
sure.
the riot act.
So I'm on Instagram and Facebook under @Nightfall Exotics. And then I am also on Morph Market. Right now, not too much stuff is getting posted just because of the colder months. I also do shows between Florida and the Northeast right now. I will be phasing back into the South once I'm done with my graduate program. But You are always welcome to reach out to me through Instagram or through Facebook Messenger. Um, I'm always happy to talk geckos, answer inquiries, or just any questions anyone may have. So feel free to shoot them my way. Thank you so much, you
All right.
guys.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Appreciate you, man. It was a
Definitely
blast.
stay on for a hot second, Emilio. Everybody, definitely have a great day. Have a great rest of your day. If you're listening
Supreme
to this later
Geckos.
on, have a great night, great morning, all that good stuff. And we'll
Don't
catch you
forget
next
to
time,
check
right?
out the 12 Supreme Days of Christmas, man.
Yeah.
While he's doing a raffle again tomorrow, go sign up. You're down to hours now to I guess sign
Make
up for the raffle tomorrow. But he's doing a
yeah, make
drawing
sure
tomorrow.
you
Check his
make sure you
page out.
watch the how to sign up for those for the next one. He does have a video out for it right now. Just go ahead, check it out, put your entries in, and you're good to go. And we'll see you guys on Monday on Wally's show. Like we won't be on there, but we'll be watching just like everybody else. But everybody have a great day. We'll talk to y'all later. Oh, all right.